The following is a conversation with Alec Renehan and Bryce Leske, who together host Australia's #1 finance and investing podcast, Equity Mates. These two fellas and Equity Mates has been very influential to me because I've learned pretty much everything I know about investing through them, but as well because they're just a couple of regular guys who have absolutely knocked this podcasting game out of the park. Alec and Ren were mates at uni, decided to give this podcasting thing a try in 2017 just to discuss and document their investing journey. But now, 5 years later, they employ several people, operate multiple shows, have raised money, are just about the most valuable media to the Australian retail investor, are about to host and disrupt the financial event space with their very own Finfest, and ultimately, the thing for which I most romantically project onto, they have managed to turn a passion project and a hobby into a lifestyle and career. So they're a couple of legends, and I was absolutely thrilled and felt so privileged to have gotten the chance to interview these guys in person. They are as nice and friendly as they sound. Now, if you're in Australia, if you're listening in Australia, it's not too late to join their Finfest, their own financial festival. The ambition of it is amazing, and I've absolutely no doubt that it is going to fulfill all the expectations that they have placed upon themselves and the shoulders of their team. It's on the 15th of October and will be the absolute best thing that you can do in Sydney that weekend. Tickets are cheap. You would be absolutely crazy to not join. And if you tell them that you came because you listened to their interview on the Curious Well Do podcast, it will make me happy. So, this podcast with Alec and Ren is hopefully not as you've heard them before. There isn't anything directly about investing, but rather there is instead a bit of a reflection from Alec and Ren about the Equity Mates journey so far, and then as well a projection into the future. We talk about the potential of podcasting and as well sort of franchising and expanding internationally, but then as well we get an elevator pitch from each of these investing experts, a company that they are particularly interested in, and that is very much not buy, hold, sell recommendation. It is just a generalized chat and pitch about a couple of companies that is very, very interesting to them. So, with no further ado, here are the Equity Mates. Do hang around to the end for me to explain my ambition for this podcast, especially if this is the first time you've ever listened to the show. We're over 110 episodes in now and have about 20 to go that just need to be sort of edited and uploaded. I am so thrilled and grateful that I get this opportunity to speak directly to you. And I really, really, really hope that maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 15, 1 in 20 of these podcasts connect with you and you find interesting. Ultimately, hopefully, just 1 in 20 you find interesting. So I encourage you to go into the library, see the different type of curiosities that I've had over the last few years, and then you will see those curiosities reflected in the guests as they've come on. But with no further ado, here is the great and powerful Equity Mates. So I get the feeling that Ren is the dreamer and Bryce is the realistic one.
Wow. What do you reckon about that?
Yeah, I think in general terms that's probably about right.
I think that's pretty unfair to Bryce. I think you got pretty big dreams as well. I think sometimes you might be a little bit more grounded in reality than I am.
But I think it's a good dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think Ren's let's just throw everything at the wall and give it all a crack right now.
Yeah.
And I agree with that, but let's do it in a bit more order.
Right? Yeah. Bryce definitely he gives it the necessary structure that
right. If it was a business where we were both a dreamer or both a what do you call me?
Realistic.
Well,
more fancy numbers guy.
We wouldn't have a business, I don't think.
If we were both dreamers, it would be a real like 0 or 1 proposition. Like the business would either collapse or would be like just killing it. But yeah, no, I think it's an important dynamic. I think the main thing is that like we're mates as well, and so when I dream a little too much and just have stupid ideas, Bryce can say it, and when Bryce is a little bit too worried about the dollars and cents, I can say it, and I think the dynamic works. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And that's the reason why there's so much chemistry between you, obviously, as well. You know, the fact that you are such good mates, you can sort of rope each other in, rein each other in without offense too much, I suppose.
Yeah, well, it's a dynamic that could go very wrong. Yeah. Like, I think a lot of people say, don't go into business with your mates. Haven't really come across why they say that yet, but I think also
don't emphasize the yet.
Well, you know, as businesses grow on scale, different pressures and stresses come, and so I think that's something that is always going to need to be considered, and we're going to have to be conscious of. But I think our personalities, at least, we don't hold grudges, or we understand each other pretty well, I think, and get over things pretty quickly. Or I think. At the end of the day as well, like, there's bigger fish to fry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, no, what do you mean?
Well, I don't know. Like, sometimes, you know, things that we disagree over or whatever, it's just, at the end of the day, it's just like disagreeing over it or carrying sort of angst and grudge over it or whatever. It's just not worth it. And, like, in the grand scheme of things, like, let's just move on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think our friendship is important. So.
Yeah. And Andy Lee from Hamish and Andy got interviewed, and he was saying that they do this thing, he and Hamish, every year where they check in and they're like, "Do you still want to do this?" And if one of them says no, then I guess they can sack it. Yeah. Bryce and I are probably not quite in that position. Like, if one of us said no, it'd probably be a tough conversation with the people we've employed to work in his business.
Like, okay,
sorry, Bryce isn't keen anymore.
we don't want to do this anymore.
But I think, to an extent, we've built a platform where we can really pursue things that interest us, and, like, hopefully as we grow and we can really, we don't just have to be podcasting about investing when we're 45 and have 3 kids running around at home. Like, hopefully we can build a platform and build a brand that, as we develop and grow and our audience grow with us, we can do other things and explore other opportunities. So I think that's sort of what we're doing with some of the other podcasts we've started. You know, the Dive is much more business news focused rather than investing specifically, because that's something that we're interested in, and, you know, we wanted to do something a little bit different and test ourselves a little bit with some different content. And, you know, in 3 years, Bryce might learn to code and build the Equity Mates app, because that's something that he wants to do. So hopefully, like, the platform that we've built allows us to keep trying new things and pursuing what interests us. On
the topic of sort of growing Equity Mates media, you mentioned the Dive. You got a lot of other arms of the business. You mentioned in an interview, Ren mentioned in an interview, about developing a number of non-financial shows, and obviously Bryce is keen on Equity Grapes.
Yeah.
Like, what are outside of obvious financial news, stock shows, things that you dream of that you would love to pursue?
Well, Ren's the dream, man. We've had plenty of conversations about Ren. Well, Equity Grapes was that was more just like, let's start a wine company.
I think we've seen a lot of businesses. Get into the beer space in Australia. The Batuta Advocate have a beer.
Bloke.
Inspired Unemployed have a beer. Bloke have a beer. We didn't want to do a beer. There's enough beers out there. But Equity Grapes was just too good a play on words to pass up.
A name leads the business idea.
It really, like a really nice red would really encapsulate a lot of Bryce as well. Like, you know,
go on. Why is that?
He likes the finer things in life.
A
little bit classy. But you know,
I think it's one of those things where we've seen. You know, Ren's mentioned the beers. You can see the possibilities when you build an audience, and that sort of starts getting your mind ticking. You see what happens overseas and I'm not saying that we're anywhere near the size of some of the successful guys overseas, but when you build a large audience, you can launch product after product that is meaningful to your audience, that has that sort of in-joke vibe, has a bit of sense of connection and community, and, you know, they just go well. And And so that kind of is where we get our creative juices ticking. It's like, what other meaningful things can we create for our audience, not only in content, but sort of product as well. So,
because the relationship you guys have with the equity mates is one of the highest converting relationships a media person could have with an audience, right? So when you use these examples of people that you look to overseas, who do you have in mind? Just so we understand what you mean.
well, I mean, when I was specifically talking about that, who's that? Is it the fat Jew? What's his name?
Go on.
Yeah, the guy. So he got
You're
massive.
gonna need to explain this now, because
I
otherwise
know
we're in trouble.
something.
Hold
Anyway,
on, I'm gonna Google it. You just keep
he built a
waffling.
massive sort of following on Instagram, and then just launched like rosé wines and clothing
no,
brands and all this sort of stuff. And it just sort of it just sort of shows that if you build a tight-knit community at scale, you can then just feed in product after product. Of course, they're all sort of meaningful, but it's just such a way to leverage.
Yeah.
And then we think about what's happening here in Australia with plenty of sort of people in the financial services where they start with a product and then really try and battle to build community. We've sort of built community. Am I right? Is it the fat Jew?
Josh Ostrovsky, the fat Jewish.
Yeah, that's him.
I'd
Yeah.
never heard of this person before.
Oh, there you go. I'm actually one not to know pop culture, so I'm surprised that
Yeah.
yeah, big following.
Big enough that he's got his own Wikipedia page.
Yeah,
And that's meaningful for us because we've tried to create the Equity Mates Media Wikipedia page a couple of times and got voted down and deleted
Bullshit.
every time.
Yeah.
So this guy's bigger than us.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll edit this out, but I mean, surely that's doable. Like you can claim the Equity Mates business page, and
I
then
mean,
from there turn into a page, right?
No, there's a stupid process around
it. Keep it in, because if anyone's listening and knows how to build Wikipedia pages, we'd love their help. But like, you have to prove that you're like noteworthy or newsworthy. So you have to provide all these third-party sources. So we're providing like news articles we've been in and all this stuff. We're providing our website.
But then you get put up against this, then like people who are sort of Wikipedia administrators who have some sort of unknown.
They've done like X number of edits and they get like a status.
They then hold the power to say yes or no, and you need like 5 out of.
No, it like goes to a voting period, and then it's like majority rules.
Yeah.
If more say keep or delete, and then
Stupid.
Yeah. Anyway, we
Spion, you're the biggest names in Australian financial media, surely.
Wow, thank you.
I'll take it.
What about AFR?
Got that, Koshy?
Soz.
I would say I would hope that in sort of our age demographic that we're up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't.
Yeah, we wouldn't be.
I think there's an
Bryce tells me-
absurd amount of bias on my end.
But we'll take it. We'll take it.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think the difference as well is that we're probably the largest, one of the largest finance communities, I guess. Like the AFR, then there's some big podcasters in our space as well that equally have sort of large communities, and they more and more coming into the space as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a journey.
What about non-financial shows you're keen on?
Oh, well, yeah, I've got plenty of ideas there. I think for me, for years, I felt there hasn't been a good AFL podcast in Australia. There's plenty of AFL-related shows, and like, Dill Buckley and what he's doing is probably best in class there. But you look at, but for years, there just hasn't been a straight review of the games and preview of the games. Don't tell me about the narrative around the games. Don't just tell me what's going on with footy. And there's a few really good NFL ones because I'm a bit of an NFL fan overseas. And I've always thought that model applied to AFL is just a gap in the market waiting to happen. So for years, I've tried to convince Bryce and another one of our mates to do it, but get shut down at every turn. And then there's just other ones. I think, we look overseas at what podcasters are doing over there, and I often think what could be applied here. So there's a really great US Supreme Court podcast called More Perfect.
Interesting, okay.
And all it does is take these incredibly complex but incredibly consequential Supreme Court decisions and make them understandable, and people understand how it impacts their lives and what it means and how they happened. And I think there's something that could definitely be done in Australia in that vein as well. So heaps of ideas. I think... I won't go on. But right now, what we're focusing on is finance and business because we want to really build the business around that. But in future, I don't know. I just love content.
You just want passion projects, but it is like just a time cost.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I think the luxury of the world that we live in 2022 is it has never been easier to monetize your interests or monetize your passions. And people, when we went to school, people said find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your love. Flip that around. Do what you love and find a way to monetize it because it has never been easier. It's just great. And like I love, I can talk. You're listening to me. I'll keep talking until you cut me off. But there's just so much to be interested in. And yeah, I love it.
But you say like it's never been easy to monetize. You have to reach that critical threshold of audience to monetize, right?
I would say that threshold has come down drastically by like meaningful factors in the past few years though.
I think meaningful monetization, yes.
But if you think about like
still need decent.
If you think about the idea of like an individual creator, that wasn't real. That was enabled by the internet because we just live in a long line of media businesses that has capitalized on new technology. But throughout history, new technology still meant you needed to be big enough and at scale to capitalize on the technology. You needed a company to produce TV, or you needed a full studio to produce radio. And as new technology has come in, the size of the organization you need to capitalize on that technology is lower. And the threshold to break even and be profitable and have a sustaining business also has been lower as a result. And so, like Bryce and I, we could run this business, just the two of us, maybe hire a producer and that's all you need. But then like the next level down is like we see like Instagram influencers and TikTok creators who are literally just one person shows and they're just creating content about things that they love. We're speaking to someone in our team who was telling us that she knows someone who quit their job, does an engineering explained video on YouTube, one video a week, and that pays for his life.
Oh,
that's his job. One video a week on engineering, like super niche topics. And I think, sure, it's still hard to monetize. If you want to scale a business as well, it's difficult. But it's never been easier and the thresholds have never been lower.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of monetization, I would love to know what it felt like when your relationship with a guest turned from them doing you a favor to then you doing them a favor by exposing them to Australia's retail investor populace.
Yeah, I remember the conversations we kind of had around this, and it was much, much, much later in the piece than I think people would probably expect.
Can you put on a timeline?
Yeah, well, I think it was, what are we now, 2022, probably late 2020 was when we really started to kind of consider, hang on a second, this is now becoming more of a distribution channel for a lot of the guys that we have coming on than it used to be. But to get to that point, we had to be incredibly sort of gracious with the guests, and they were always doing us a favor. I remember some of the guests that we had on in the early days, and we just kind of had to fake it till we make it. Yeah, we got a massive podcast.
So you straight up sort of fudge the numbers?
Well, we didn't really fudge numbers, but I think it was at a time where podcasting was so new in Australia, so young.
People just assumed they were all big.
People just, or they just wanted to be on a podcast. Right. Like it was kind of like a almost as a bigger deal for the guest to just be on a podcast than it was for us to have the guest on. So, but I do recall the conversation we had with another podcaster as well, who kind of just opened our eyes a little to kind of say, guys, you got to realize the distribution that you're giving these guys to retail investors. And we knew it, but we always kind of didn't sort of...
I think we knew it, but we didn't recognize how valuable it was.
Yeah.
We didn't know what the rest of the finance industry was paying to speak to like a room full of people, let alone an audience at scale, and that sort of really blew our mind.
It was like we were creating a lot of value, but we weren't capturing that value for ourselves. Yeah,
do you think now you've reached the equilibrium where your ads rates are at the right amount?
No.
I think we have like a mental model that we like to talk about value capture v value creation, and I think you can plot every business in the world on that spectrum, and some businesses really sit on the value creation side of it. I think Google is a classic example where they just capture a fraction of the value that they've created. And then there are other businesses that try and capture almost all of the value they create. And a lot of them are the businesses that we hate the most.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah.
And for us, we want to be a business that creates more value than they capture. And in particular, not for the finance industry, but for our audience, those people that felt locked out of the finance industry. So I don't think we'll ever say to that question, we're capturing the majority of the value that we're creating, because I think when we do that, you start to hurt your brand, you start to hurt yourself long term, and it's not really what we want to be known for.
And there are other ways to generate revenue from the value that we've created outside of just advertising. So,
like we touched on with the fat Jewish.
Yeah. Equity, great.
So what would you guys look? I mean, because maybe an obvious vertical would be you engineer your own brokerage platform or something like that. I mean, like, what are the products that you think about, or at least you dream about, Equity Media could do?
Yeah, so I think for us, the start, because we obviously have had all of these conversations. The starting point for us is we don't want to do something that's already done well. And I think for us, brokerage is something that is done well to the point that it's done too much. Sure. And like some of these brokers have been game changers for investors, wherever you're listening to this podcast. But in Australia, you know, we've got access to markets that we previously could only dream about at costs that were just unbelievable when it was just the big banks offering this stuff. But there's now like 40 of them, and they're all getting
heaps of cash.
Heaps of cash. It just it is a business where you look at it and you say, there's going to be consolidation, there's going to be failures, there will be big winners. But the idea that Bryce and I could enter that space and add anything that these guys can't already do is just ludicrous.
Yeah. Sure.
But we look at other parts of the finance industry and say, that's broken for the retail investor. Like people like the three of us can't access it because we don't have the money or we don't have the connections, and people like traditional fintechs have struggled to address it because they don't have an audience already. They don't have that scale to fractionalize the cost. Whereas because we have an audience, maybe that's something that we can do that others can't. So,
for example,
well, if I told you, then I would have to delete this audio.
Oh, really? Okay.
Nah, look, we don't like we've tossed ideas around, but there's nothing where it's like this is what we're chasing.
Okay.
I think what's guiding us though is the mission of making markets accessible. So that's kind of like, to Ren's point, there's no point doing a brokerage platform, already exists. What are the areas in the market or the tools and resources that still are creating barriers for our audience? Where can we further break down those barriers and make markets accessible? Access to different investing options, or is it tools that break down analysis in ways that people can better understand and actually action? It's all those sorts of things that sort of drive and guide us.
So I believe it's, you remember, a bit of a hobby horse is access to private businesses. Is it something along this lines or something?
I think for both of us, private businesses, we look at and we're like, there's your ability to profit in this area is completely correlated to the amount of money you have to start with.
Yeah.
And that isn't an ideal situation. Those that have money have the best opportunity and can make more money. And we've seen more and more of, like it's crazy to think that in 2000 there were maybe double the amount of publicly listed companies that are available today. Like the last couple of decades has just been a trend of companies staying private for longer. And we can think of the classic examples of that, SpaceX, Stripe, Airbnb and Uber before them. They just reached such lofty valuations before they went public. And that meant that most of the value created was for those that had access to private markets. But then also the amount of companies that are getting taken off public boards. So in Australia, Sydney Airport got acquired recently, went back to the private market. Our biggest hospital operator, Ramsay Healthcare, is probably going to get taken out by a private equity player, KKR. Again, that's just like companies that could create value for people like us who can invest in public markets, getting taken off the boards, and the value creation goes to those that can get in private equity rounds and stuff like that. So we look at that and we say there's a fundamental problem. The challenge is it's an incredibly hard problem to solve. And so I think we're not sitting here saying that the fact that we have a few 100,000 people in the audience means that we're going to be able to take on KKR and start solving for private equity.
A few 100,000.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you guys try to keep those numbers like hidden or vague?
We don't set out to.
Should I not have said that?
No, it doesn't matter. We don't set out to.
It's just a question I always have when I'm listening to a podcast. How big is this show? You know?
Yeah.
We don't set out to be private.
I should have said a few million.
We don't set out to be private like that, but podcasting, unlike YouTube or any of the social channels, is pretty opaque. Yeah. So, you can see what our socials are and stuff, and there's been news articles where we've mentioned what our downloads are and that sort of stuff. There's actually some public rankers online that you can go on and see Australia's largest podcasts, and it tells you how many downloads we've done per month.
Does it? But is it accurate?
Yeah, it's pretty accurate.
No way.
But I guess it excludes a lot of podcasts who aren't sort of part of this commercial
So
system.
you have to opt into it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of podcasts in our space that actually aren't on the list who we know are sort of at a similar level to what we are. Yeah.
Just to close the thought out around private markets before we go on, there are some companies that are trying to do stuff in this space, like crowdfunding, for example, has exploded, but we don't think it's solved it that well. So if there are fintechs out there that have ideas on how to solve it, hit us up, because it is a problem that we see, but we don't have a solution for it.
Lovely. Something that I realize with podcasting is the fact that there is such a black hole of data that isn't appropriately indexed and understood. The searchability and the discovery function for podcasts is terrible, but you can't even know how big a podcast might be. It'd be brilliant if you could just, rank what are the most downloaded as a way to understand what actually is popular versus whatever the distributor wants to tell you is popular and so forth. I guess for you guys at the top, you mightn't feel this pressure, but for me and maybe other smaller podcasters listening, it is very frustrating.
This is also.
Would you want it to be ranked that way though? I think.
I wouldn't mind. I mean, I would be okay with people knowing how small of a show it is, because it would allow for other discovery methods. It wouldn't simply be a rank on download. There'd be other variables that you'd be able to search for.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised at some point in the future it gets to that point. I think it will be commercially driven.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know.
We've had this conversation, and if we had the ability to build a podcasting app, there's definitely space for a Netflix style recommendation algorithm for audio. Spotify are trying to build it, and they're doing okay, but I don't think Spotify is great at discovering small shows. I think we're privileged in this position that we get in that recommendation algorithm a bit. But I agree with you. There is so much quality content out there that never gets discovered, and that's a shame.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, and you said this explicitly. It's simply you rely on the guests as a sort of medium to expose your show to other people. I discovered this one, I'll mention it. It's called No Limitations. Some old Australian fella. It is such a good show, and I'm sure he gets 100 downloads an episode or something, but it's so fucking good.
Yeah, but I just feel like if you were ranking by most downloaded, then that's even worse for all those small shows. You know what I mean? You're just going to if that guy who's doing 100, he's just going to be so far down the scroll bar that you're not even, and you're just going to be like, that's not even.
I'm thinking as the download being a variable, there'd also be multiple other variables. More categorization, more maybe demographic distribution. Where is the show actually listened to, and so forth. This would add to discoverability.
Yeah. But again, they all would fall into the same problem that Bryce has identified, because if you're then saying what demographics are already listening or what ages are already listening, you get into the already listening problem.
Everyone, the domino is always at the top.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it'd be a power law where the majority of new listeners accrue to those that already have the majority of listeners. But it's a problem that needs to be solved, and someone will solve it. There can't be this much money in audio and have this poor discoverability.
Yeah.
It'll get solved.
you have emphasized how long it took to get to X amount of downloads before. I'd love to know, how long did it take you guys to hit 1,000 downloads in an episode, or average 1,000 an episode?
In an episode?
Yeah, how many years?
I reckon at least, let me think, probably at least 2.
Yeah.
At least 2.
Yeah.
Like, I think people pick up a microphone now and think that they know podcasting and you can do it and you're going to build an audience overnight.
And sell to Spotify.
And sell to Spotify. But I mean, as I've said in stories before, like I remember when we hit 500 downloads, like cumulatively, let alone per episode. And that took 6 months or 7 months, and we were doing 1 or 2 episodes a week. Oh, no. We were doing 1 a fortnight.
We were doing
at that
fortnightly,
stage. Yeah, 1 a fortnight. And then we went weekly, and then we went twice a week. But 1,000 an episode would have been 2 years at least. And there's sort of data that shows how long it takes to get that sort of 10, 50, 100,000. And it's years. It's years to build an audience. So anyone listening who wants to start a podcast, it's a slog.
Yeah, and you said on the Mark Burris show, like, don't do it.
Yeah, don't.
That sounds like he's not much of a dreamer.
I think I say that in like, it would be, I would, if Ren and I were to try and do what we did 5 years ago, from a business point of view now, then I would really question that. Sure. If it's a passion project, no issues. Like if you're doing it for yourself, which is how we started, like you're doing this for you to understand a subject matter better, or for, as in our case, it was our passion of wanting to be better investors. It was just a self-serving passion project. No issue with that. Like you're not out there to try and grow multi tens of thousand audience. But I think some people get carried away with the idea of having a big community and that sort of stuff, and probably that's the wrong way to think about going about this, because there's so many podcasts. The quality now has to be incredibly good to cut through with all the huge producers out there that pour money into it. We've spoken about discoverability and how difficult it is. So, yeah.
No one who's set out to build a big community builds a big community. Like, because you need to be giving something to your audience rather than just trying to get them to love you. And I think, as Bryce said, we started Equity Mates because we personally wanted to learn, and we felt that there wasn't anything that was there to teach us. And so we used it as an excuse to speak to people. And I think a lot of people found that they were in a similar position to us. But if Bryce had been like, I want to be a superstar in the next 6 months. Well, if Bryce had said, I want to be a superstar, we would have given up earlier because no one was listening. And what would the audience have got out of it?
The authenticity would have suffered majorly.
Yeah. And that's how you build audience.
Talk to me about COVID, because I remember when I started listening to you, it was the beginning of 2020 and it was on Get Started Investing. Yeah. Was this an extraordinarily savvy business move, or was it fortunate that the biggest kick of retail investing of all time happened to coincide with your Get Started Investing being...
Well, at the time, because we launched Get Started Investing December 2019. Yeah. And so 4 months later, the biggest market crash of our lifetime happens, down 30% in a month. And so we were kicking ourselves because we were like, we have just created a show called Get Started Investing, telling people to start investing. And then if they listened, they would have started and they would have lost 30% of their money in maybe a month. So yeah, we actually thought it was a terrible business move, but what happened after was just crazy. Yeah. The numbers exploded. We were still working full-time jobs at that point, and advertising dried up early in 2020. No one knew what was going on, so no one was spending. So revenue for us dried up for a while, but then that came back online. The numbers were great, and that was when we made the decision to quit our jobs. So yeah, it was good timing. It was fortunate timing. But I think for us, regardless of COVID supercharging the amount of retail investors in the space, that trend was playing out for a lot longer. Like more and more retail investors were getting into the space. Technology was making it easier. Costs were coming down. It's just that COVID probably put like its timeline 3 years ahead of where it would have been.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it was a savvy business move. It was probably the biggest strategic move we'd made to that point.
A second podcast.
Second podcast, yeah. And I think that's where we started. In the back of our minds, we were thinking there's something here. We could definitely want to do something a bit more than just podcasting. And Ren was having whispers of quitting work and stuff. I'm just looking at the numbers. Yeah, we launched it in December, and it grew tenfold from December to June.
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah. December 2019.
That's the hockey stick.
Yeah, that was for Get Started Investing.
Unfortunately, it didn't keep growing like that.
No, and then Equity Mates similarly went in December, and then by March it was up sort of 300%.
Never look back, eh?
Yeah.
Never look back.
It's so amazing to project onto your story and romanticize it, to find a passion that becomes a lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, the challenge now, Ryan, and you could probably give us a bit of feedback and advice.
I don't know why.
How do we get this overseas? That's the challenge that we're thinking about at the moment.
Oh,
like when you're listening to podcasts over in Europe and that sort of stuff, like are there Equity Mates equivalents, or like, you know what I mean? That's and I don't know if you can provide any advice, but that's the business decision we're looking at the moment.
Do you want completely unqualified advice?
Yes.
Yeah. That's how we've got here.
I live in, the audience knows. There's a show called 25 Minutes, which basically is Equity Mates Sweden.
Okay.
It's terrific. Well, it's called 25 Minuter, so you won't find it. But but I would assume that Equity Mates is equivalent in most podcast listening countries. Interestingly enough, I think South Korea is per capita the highest podcasting listening country in the world.
Wow.
Sweden, number 2. The Nordics quickly follow after that. But then gross numbers, it's the English-speaking world. So it's the US, UK, then Australia, New Zealand, baked into one. I would assume each of these countries have their own flavor, and you guys are intensely Australian.
Yeah.
And so also a lot of the content is on the ASX.
Yeah.
So I think there might be inherently something that geographically isolates you. Maybe that would be the unqualified take.
No, we get that.
That's what we think. The whole speaking about Australian stocks is something that we want to be mindful of, because obviously we have an Australian audience, but I guess we have a view that investing is truly global. We might be in different countries, but we all are interacting with stocks in similar ways through similar brokerage platforms, and most of us are looking at similar companies, aka we all look to America and what's going on over there, a little bit to Europe. So we think investing will get more and more global, not less and less. But it's funny that most financial media is so inwards looking. It's very rare that you find truly global coverage. Yeah.
I would as well be so fascinated to find out how you could geographically expand into another culture, another language. You're fucked. But, you know what I mean? Although some really savvy like true crime podcasts, they will just get it translated with a professional or narrator, and that's fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
I think if
different vibe though, because how do you translating the dynamic between Ren and I is a lot more difficult than just going, here's your script for true crime.
I think the
Laugh
model,
here.
Yeah.
I think the model with foreign languages and maybe just overseas countries is like a chapter model, where you find the equity mates in Indonesia or the equity mates in South Korea,
and you fund them,
and you fund them,
Yes,
and you
that makes
extend the equity mates brand, but it's you have two people that are our equivalents in those countries.
Jason Calacanis does that with Get Started Investing.
With Get Started Investing, he
You know about that show, right?
No.
You know who Jason Calacanis is?
No.
No way. Do you listen to the All In podcast? You know Chamath Palihapitiya is?
Oh, yeah.
He's one of those 4.
I'm not a big fan of Chamath, to be honest.
Yeah, well, irrespective of what you think of him, this fella, Jason, is a venture capitalist, but he runs the it's not Get Started Investing. This Week in Startups, sorry.
I was going to say,
it's called This Week in Startups. It's a giant podcast.
I have heard that. I've heard of that, yeah.
So he does that. He funds chapters in a bunch of different countries. So there's a Get Started, there's a This Week in Startups Sweden, for example.
Right, okay,
This
that's
Week in
cool.
Startups UK. He's got that. and he'll find someone who is good at media and just fucking gets it, is involved in all the startups in his area, and create a podcast that way. I have no idea how successful they are, but I mean, that is something he does.
I mean, it's the franchise model applied to media.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would love to see you guys do it.
It's on the roadmap.
It'd be.
Oh, is it?
Global expansion.
Yeah.
On the roadmap.
Do you guys have an insight into how much financial podcasts are in other markets? You know, whether there is an Equity Mates equivalent in terms of its position in the culture in the financial
Well, this is what I was trying to get at with, like, when you say the 25-minute in Sweden, like, is it the same sort of dynamic that Equity Mates is in terms of the audience they're going after, the age kind of, or is it a make finance simple podcast? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not. It's a discussing finance. So it has the discussion, but it is less organized than yours. You know, they don't say like, we're talking about this stock today, this industry today. It's kind of like
chatting.
A week in the markets, but it's really good. They're both extremely sophisticated investors themselves, right? So
Yeah.
Surprised people think we're organized.
Anyway, we digress the conversation.
It's
interesting.
Okay, yeah.
It's a big challenge that we got to.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure out. Yeah.
To return to the
Your
prep,
show.
what is an extremely savvy business move that you've made?
Oofed.
Picking Bryce as a partner.
Oh, nice.
You can claim that. Okay.
Jeez, what is? Probably getting on a producer.
Yeah. I think
taking away.
It's the biggest cliche in all startups, but hiring decisions are always your best and your worst decisions.
Right.
Producer, commercial, yeah.
Right. And what about a terrible decision? The worst business decision?
I wouldn't say.
And don't say hiring as well, because he's listening.
I wouldn't say there's been any bad decisions, but I think we've been pretty good at recognizing when some just aren't worth pursuing, or when we've sort of just. Yeah, we've always got a lot that we want to do. That's the challenge.
Yeah. I feel like we've, there's been some shows that we probably didn't put the effort into to really putting our best foot forward, and I think
we're launching Australia's largest finance festival this year, Finfest. It may go down in history as the worst business decision.
True. Might be Fire Festival level.
Or it might go down as the best business decision we've ever made.
How nervous are you guys for that?
I'm nervous.
I'm just sick of talking about it. I just
Are you nervous because there's so much on the line? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot financially on the line. There's we've been a lot of people have put trust in us to deliver something that hasn't been done before. But if it goes well, it's going to be epic. So, it's also coming at a time when there's a lot going on, and this is probably the biggest thing that we've sort of worked towards.
Bryce is getting married 2 weeks before.
Nice.
Don't know why we.
Rookie. Anyway.
I mean, it'll be right. You'll be fresh off the honeymoon.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
no,
actually, no. I guess
honeymoon.
there's a lot of prep.
There's a lot of prep in those 2 weeks.
No, I'll be on a honeymoon.
Honeymoon after Finfest.
Doesn't know.
Yeah, I think the challenge for us is we think that finance events aren't done well in Australia. Like, there's a lot of great information, but it's just delivered in a wrapper that is, nondescript rooms, fold-out chairs, boring PowerPoint presentations with too much text. Like, it doesn't exactly convey what investing is, which is just like this opportunity to capitalize on the work of some of the smartest people and the biggest companies working on the biggest problems, and the opportunity to take control of your finances and build financial freedom and a better life. Like, that's not captured in a drab grey conference room. And I think for us, we say that, and then if we can't deliver something better, then we're just part of the problem. And we spent a lot of money becoming part of the problem.
When you explain the boring PowerPoint, the pinstripe suit, that's an example of how you don't want it to be communicated. Who do you think of who is a person that you think of that communicates markets and investing like amazingly? just so crisp, so pure, so clean. You wish you could do it.
Ooh.
Good question.
Yeah, that is good. Alan Cole at ABC.
Yeah.
Well, he's obviously doing it in a way that's designed for mass TV, but he does a decent job, I guess. But not for our age. I think for our age is that's a challenge. That's a challenge.
Some of the guests you guys have are unreal.
Yeah. The best finance communicator to a non-finance audience.
Yen Liao.
Yeah,
He was great. Yeah. But I think this is not self-serving or blowing our own trumpet, but I think the way we interview allows them to kind of speak like that. A lot of the times they will come on and finish the interview and just like have had such an enjoyable experience because they've been able to just talk about what they're really experienced at. A lot of times when you put a fund manager, they're often being interviewed by media or someone who's kind of putting them under pressure, trying to get out of them why they haven't performed, or you know what I mean. And so it doesn't allow them to. It doesn't allow them to just talk.
Yeah, it's so adversarial. That's and we are not like we are intentionally gentle interviewers because you don't need to instantly be adversarial and instantly try and be critical of what they're doing. Like the company, the CEOs that we get to interview, the fund managers that we get to interview are incredibly smart people with a lot of insight. And like, it's our job just to get that out of them and making them uncomfortable and having a hard first question. It's not a recipe to actually get the most out of them. But to answer your earlier question, I still think the best finance communicator to a non-finance audience is also the greatest investor of all time. It's Buffett.
Old Wazza.
Yeah, like there's a reason that like he has all of the pithy quotes and you know can communicate so much with so little, and he's not exactly. He's probably, if we were going to have a totem for Finfest, it probably wouldn't be him. He's probably doesn't capture the festival and the fun of it all. But I can't think of anyone who communicates finance better.
Yeah. Well, that's half the. I think given that we can't just name a couple of people off the top of our head is half the issue.
Right. My head actually went to Dave Portnoy for a while. Do you remember how he? Do you know Dave Portnoy?
The markets always go up.
Yeah. And I think for like he obviously just was a day trader during COVID because there was no sport on. But I think like the color and movement he brought to a pretty stale industry was. I don't think it was valuable in the sense that people learnt anything, but I think it was entertaining.
Certainly.
And so if there's a way that you could combine like the entertainment factor of Dave Portnoy with the wisdom of Warren Buffett, that's the person that the world needs.
Interesting. Could it be one of the two of you?
No.
Would it be too much
Bryce.
to suggest that maybe you're some of the best communicators of finance and markets?
Well, that's our goal, but I don't know.
But I don't think we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you.
So, one of the amazing things, and Ren, you always really beat this drum a lot about investing, is that you get an opportunity to explore with depth a range of curiosities, which really most other lines of work wouldn't allow. You know, and if you weren't almost forced into it, you also wouldn't do it in your free time either. You know, for instance, your love of wooden pallets. You know, it's such a bizarre curiosity to have. I'm sure in any other line of work that wouldn't have become something because once you dig into it, it's fascinating.
I was at Coles and I was fascinated with wooden pallets at Coles, and they didn't really get why I was interested in that part of the business.
But clearly now, because you're preparing and producing so many podcasts, you're forced into this eclectic range of curiosities. Before you did this, did you guys have that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what has ultimately led us to this point, not only from investing, but from business to friendship to everything. I think we have just, and it's not only us, a lot of our mates as well, I think, but that just internal curiosity, for things, for the world. So yeah, it's what's led us to this point.
Where does that take you now?
Who knows? That's the enjoyable part of being so curious.
No, but I more mean like, for example, outside of work.
Yeah.
You know, what's on your Audible? What's on your bedstand? What are things that you are really interested in that doesn't contribute to this at all? Obviously, contribute to this at all.
I think it's all in one though for me. It's like I think that a lot of what I'm interested in outside of work, I'm super fortunate that I can turn it, to Ren's point, turn it into a job. What's on my Audible, or I don't really listen to a lot of podcasts, to be honest, but
that's our dirty secret here at this business.
yeah, and outside of work reading, I kind of take a fiction approach because I kind of need to de-stress, not de-stress, but that's how I kind of unwind a little. But yeah, my curiosity feeds into everything that we do here, and as Ren and I've said, like business equity mates or not, we would be reading and consuming and talking about exactly what we're doing right now.
That's so sick.
Anyway, probably not to the level of Ren might be consuming just as much, but it's not like we're specifically doing this for the business.
Yeah. I think the line between at work and out of work is blurred when you're in a content business, because we'll watch something on YouTube that is completely unrelated to what we're doing, but be like, oh, the camera technique there was great, or like every podcast I listen to now is through a production lens, and I love podcasts. So sport, politics, news, whatever the topic is, like there's always something you can learn from it, because there's heaps of people that are just better than us at it, and so like you're always just trying to learn. But yeah, similar to Bryce, I mean, I'm still a big non-fiction reader. I try and get into fiction, and most of the time I go back to non-fiction. But yeah, I think we just are curious, intensely curious, and I think earlier in the conversation I was saying that hopefully Equity Mates can be a platform that we want to build whatever we want to build. As our curiosity moves in different directions, hopefully we can create content that allows us to explore that and I guess monetize that curiosity. And for us to talk about The Dive again, this business news show, there wasn't really an avenue for us to talk about just some of like the weird and wonderful business stories that were out there, but we were consuming heaps of that content. We were learning heaps about it, and would sometimes try and shoehorn it into the Equity Mates podcast, but sometimes it didn't really fit. And so we've created this new podcast, this new Instagram feed, The Dive, that allows us to just go headfirst into that as well.
And that'll become its own thing over time.
Yeah, well, it hit number 1 in the charts a couple of days ago, in the business news charts. So it's building. It's slow going, but we want it to be dream scenario. It's as big as Get Started Investing or Equity Mates. Dream scenario, we're bigger, but yeah.
It's unreal. I really do like The Dive. It reminds me of the Invest Like the Best does business breakdowns as well. And that guy, I think, is one of the best interviewers out there.
Yeah, he's good.
100%.
Bryce and I look up to Patrick O'Shaughnessy.
That's his name.
Yeah. He is very much in the industry, and he's industry speaking to industry. But in terms of like inspirational finance podcasters, he would be number 1 for us.
And you talk about like consuming it through a producer's lens. To ask the super high signal, no BS question like he does is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Sometimes, truly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're rounding it out here. I'd love to know, what is the most serendipitous thing that's happened to you individually because of your platform, your sort of notoriety? It wouldn't be too much to say, kind of celebrities, like.
Well, Bryce tells me he is.
What's the most serendipitous thing that's happened to you guys because of Equity Mates?
It's a tough question. I don't know. Does anything come to mind for you?
Not really.
I think there's like a lot of like we're in an incredibly privileged position, and so I think where my mind goes is the people we've got to meet, or the people we've got to work with, or the people we've got to hire. I think it blows my mind that the people that we got to hire chose to work with us when the other opportunities they had available. I don't know if that's quite serendipity, but I think in terms of what I'm most thankful for, it's people.
Yeah.
You got nothing. I'll frame it a different way.
Okay.
I'll frame it a different way. because of Equity Mates, what is a moment you've been in that you just could not believe you were a part of it? It's almost out of body experience. You know, like, for instance, this question.
Surely the answer is this interview right here.
Come on, mate.
Oh, I mean, there's been plenty. Yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of instances where you kind of just go, you know, interviewing Malcolm Turnbull, for example, would be one.
That was huge.
One moment where you're just like, hold on a second, like we're speaking to Malcolm Turnbull, who you know only a matter of years before was the Prime Minister of Australia, and you never thought you'd have those opportunities. Now here we are about to throw a multi-thousand person event in Barangaroo, in one of Sydney's most iconic cultural locations. Like, who would have thought we'd be doing that? You know, we're employing people. I think that, to Ren's point, is like a holy shit moment. Like, you know, you have all these. We raised money. Like, even that.
That's cool.
You have all these ideas in your mind of like what. You see these moments happen to other people and other entrepreneurs speak about them, and you think that is like markers of sort of success or markers of like, you know, achievements that you'd like to experience at some point, and they could kind of slowly just come around, and we've been lucky enough to experience some of them.
Yeah.
But I still genuinely don't feel like what I feel like is going on is definitely not what people perceive is happening. Like, I think people perceive us as like this huge, amazing media conglomerate that's super successful and we're famous and all this stuff, but
dining with
just
all the hedge fund
managers. It's just Ren and I, mates, playing golf. You know what I mean?
Trundling into work every day, looking at a screen, looking at each other, making some content, going home.
And so I think that I don't sit here and I'm every day going like, yeah, this is epic. You know,
it's probably a personality flaw on both of our behalf, though, on both of our parts, that we don't really like stop and be like, this is amazing. It's like, you know, we'll get started investing and it's instantly like, what's the next thing? Or we'll raise money and it's instantly like, what's next? And I mean, that's probably why we keep throwing new stuff out there, but it probably is also why we don't stop and reflect.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this recently though, like the challenges that we're going through, some of the challenges we're going through at the moment, and just thinking like, you know, if someone was to say, these are your challenges a year ago, you just be like, you know, that how are we going to get through that? And then you think about that's just what entrepreneurship is. Like, some of the people that have invested in us, they started with nothing and grown multi-million-dollar businesses that you just day in, day out, just keep moving along and building that sort of ladder and pushing through it. And I don't think, it's interesting.
Actually, one thing that I completely forgot, but maybe that was a real like, how did this happen moment, was first time we saw our book in bookshops. That was weird, especially because the narcissists that we are, we put ourselves on the cover. Well, the publisher put us on the cover, so it was like, it's not just seeing your book; it's seeing you staring back at
the two of you.
Yeah.
Did you ever get a what do they call it? Is it inferiority complex or
imposter syndrome?
That's the one. Yeah. Did you ever get imposter syndrome? Like, what right do we have telling people how to invest, seeing yourself in a book?
That's the thing, Ryan. We don't tell people how to invest.
So I think, like, positionally, we've never tried to hold ourselves out as experts. And that gets harder as you get bigger, and people, you know,
you definitely look to as authorities.
We don't want to be. Like, our very first tagline was made for everybody by nobodies. And, like, that is very much how we still think of it. Like, we think of ourselves as outside of the industry, but in this like privileged position where we can like get people and like show them to the audience and get information from them and bring them to the audience. But we definitely don't think of ourselves as authorities or experts or anything like that. So in terms of imposter syndrome, not really, because like the amount of stupid decisions we've made or like stocks that we've spoken about that just were terrible stocks in the end. Like, I hope our audience realize that we are not experts and we're on this journey as well. But to flip it around, if we were holding ourselves out as experts, yeah, I would probably have a couple of hours of anxiety every night thinking like, what if we get found out? Because like we're not experts.
Yeah, I think it's hard. You can't dwell on it too much in the industry in media. I think like otherwise we would just second guess everything that we do.
So we got to wrap it up. I want to see how quickly you can answer this, and then there's 2 questions that I try to ask every guest.
Sure.
The first, can you elevator pitch us each an exciting company?
An exciting company.
Yes.
Without, but with a very clear caveat.
This isn't buy, hold, sell.
This is not investment advice. As we said, we are not experts. We're just talking about a company we're excited about, not about the price that they're
sorry about that transition.
We just got to get that in.
Yeah. No, go for it.
Do you want to go?
Nah, you go.
All right.
I need to think about one.
If I think about the technology that's going to drive the biggest change over the next couple of decades, I think it's AI and machine learning. And it's been a technology that has promised it a lot and not delivered much for a long time, but we're starting to see those green shoots emerge. And then if I was to say what company has the highest concentration of AI researchers and PhDs per square meter, there is one with an absolute bullet, no close second, and that's Alphabet. The AI that they are developing is incredible and pretty scary. DeepMind, a company that they acquired, similarly is just incredible. And you layer that technology on with what I would say is the strongest business in the world, which is Google Search, like 98% market share, an incredible moat.
A ridiculous moat.
And then you layer on the other businesses they have. YouTube, which is a $100 billion business in its own right, and all of the other bets around Waymo, self-driving cars, Wing, delivery drones, their healthcare bets, everything else. For me, I think about a business that I would be most excited to work for, and if it wasn't Equity Mates, Alphabet would be number 1.
Unbelievable.
I'm going to not recommend a company.
Oh, what?
No, we've been doing a bit of content recently over decarbonisation. If I think to Ren's point around future, I think this is a space that provides plenty of investment opportunities. And we've been lucky enough to speak to some owners of businesses. Calix is one. And there's some fascinating companies over in Europe that are putting their best foot forward to help decarbonise the planet. So for me, an exciting sector, I think, or industry that is multi-decade, plenty of investment opportunity is decarbonisation. So I know it doesn't answer your question, but...
Are you prepared to say a specific company in that space you like?
Well, it's...
You like as a business, not as an investment opportunity.
I don't even know if this one's publicly listed, but I like the ambition. We have spoken about on the show. I actually can't remember the name of it, but they are building large turbines in Iceland that are sucking carbon dioxide out of the air.
Sick.
And putting it into the ground in like rock form somehow. Mm-hmm. Obviously, tiny scale at the moment. I think we produce like 36 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year. They're hoping to get to be able to pull out 1 billion by 2040 or something like that. So still not massive, but I just like the ambition and these companies that are coming out of nowhere that are really trying to tackle the problem. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Nice. Finally, too, I like to ask as many guests as possible. What is a country that you're particularly bullish on? Country.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Do you have one that comes to mind?
That is interesting. From a business point of view,
take it where you like.
I've got 2 that come to mind. From a business point of view.
Yep.
So first of all, Bryce and I have a running joke that Stockholm is the home of audio, and that's because Spotify came out of there, and then the biggest podcasting business in the world, Acast, has come out of there. And then a startup that's also in the audio space that we've worked with, Quarter. They take company earnings calls and they've got an app. They're available for free. And so we often joke that Sweden, or the Stockholm in particular, is the home of audio. So I guess number 1 for me, because we're in the audio business in podcasting, Sweden. Number 2, I read a book a few years ago, Startup Nation. It's about Israel, and it talks about how the structure of, I guess, their education system, and then the military conscription, and then their business community just is so conducive to just incredible businesses emerging out of there. And Israel punches above its weight in so many of those sectors, like cyber and everything. And it's so tied to a really strong education system, but then like the education in the military conscription. And I'm not advocating for military conscription in Australia, but I think reading that book, you just realize that like when society makes choices, and those choices prioritize different things and create different outcomes, and you can see that the decisions made there create an environment that's so conducive to business success and startups. And so in terms of being bullish from a business perspective, Israel would be up there as well. Great book, Startup Nation. Highly recommend it.
Sick answer. Out of almost 100 episodes now, that's the first Israel.
Really?
Yeah.
There you go. I've never been to either of those countries as well, so
you
I
gotta
haven't done my due
come to
diligence.
From a population size, transition of middle class, and some fascinating business already existing there, I would go Indonesia. Yeah, there's some amazing businesses there that have huge market share, massive population. The growth they're going to experience over the next decades, transition of middle class. I think, you see what kind of is panning out in the States from e-commerce point of view and whatnot, and how that's transitioning to some of these massive conglomerates in Indonesia.
Has anyone given Indonesia as an answer before?
Yes.
Okay. Nice. Yeah.
Would Australia benefit somehow just out of proximity to a booming Indonesia?
I mean, from like a agricultural point of view, perhaps.
No, we should benefit massively, but to the point about choices being made by businesses and governments, it doesn't look like we're really setting ourselves up for success there.
Sorry, please.
I was just going to say, the classic example of that is we have all of these great companies that Bryce is talking about emerging, and the classic example there is Gojek, their Uber for scooters, and Tokopedia, their big e-commerce platform, merged. The fact that the Australian Stock Exchange, the ASX, wasn't desperately fighting for that listing, and instead the company went over and it has listed or is going to list over in the States, or maybe like dual list in Indonesia and the States. The fact that Australia is not trying to get them and Grab and all of these Southeast Asian unicorns, for me, is just like, we are missing our opportunity.
What is up with that? Why?
We need a whole other podcast to talk about that.
Yeah, no, that's true.
But if anyone from the ASX or Chi-X, because Chi-X is now competing in Australia, is listening, chase those Asian listings. Be the gateway of capital for the world to the Southeast Asian market.
Yeah. Finally, boys, if you could listen to a conversation between any two people of history, dead or alive, no language barrier, and since there is two of you, I would suggest that you pick one each.
Jesus.
Not two each, one each. So you pick someone to speak with the other person.
You've picked Jesus?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'd have to pick Muhammad.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Does that count?
Can we steer away from religion? It's just...
Well, I mean,
Sure.
Well, you primed that one. You know, this might just be because of the current state of... So I think I was still quite bullish on America, but I think we all look at them and we're like, they've got a lot of problems at the moment, obviously. And a lot of, I think their problems stem from their unrelenting, desperate grip to their founding document that they refuse to deviate from, even though one of the writers of that document said it should be updated every 18 years. So the person who said that, Jefferson, I want him to speak to some modern Republican, someone on the Supreme Court, and just set them straight.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you
That's a great answer. You on?
Henry Ford changed cars as we know it.
Sick.
Elon Musk is changing cars as we know
nice,
it.
yeah.
And so put them head to head and see what happens.
Unbelievable. Equity mates, I can't thank you enough for being so generous with your time. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So thank you again, Alec and Ren. And as well, the 15th of October, Finfest. You'd be mad to not go, since that is going to be the best thing happening in Sydney on that weekend. Bring your mates, bring your mum, bring your dad, bring your brother, bring your sister, bring the missus. It's going to be a terrific event. Now, to the ambition for this podcast. My hope is to corner the podcast market for eclectic curiosities in whatever country it is that you're listening in from. Now, there is no indexable category of eclectic curiosities. It's rather general interest or true crime or comedy or X, Y, and Z category. Eclectic interest is not one. So, therefore, the only way for me to achieve this ambition is through a myriad of reviews. So, if you've listened this far, I would please ask you to do me the favor of switching up Spotify, leaving a healthy 5-star juicy review on Apple, flicking it up, really nice comment, 5 stars. Any other podcast app that you're listening on, I would just ask you, please leave good reviews, encourage the algorithm, reinforce the algorithm so it knows that people are listening, people are enjoying, and that is all. Thank you again to the Equity Mates, Alec and Ren, and thank you to you, my dear listener. Ciao.